Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Unscripted. I am your host, Shanaz Saddique. The ever-rolling important role of media has becoming more and more important as time has gone on, I would argue, as a media anchor and host. But many of you will understand, and I hope will appreciate the fact that that role has become more and more powerful. And that role in itself holds many different kinds of responsibilities. People like myself, people like you, the viewers, can see that whether it be on social media, whether it be on TV, whether it be on radio, or whether it be in the newspapers, that media in itself has a role to play. And today I want to look at the role of media and ask the question, are we creating fanatics? Are we creating liberal thinking people? What are we creating? Or are we not creating anything, but in fact showing a mirror image of the representation of people around us, whether they be old, whether they be young, whether they be people of faith or not. And today my guest will do exactly that with me in a discussion about the role of media and what our role is to play, and do we hold them accountable for the fanatics or not around us. I have with me Anjum Anwar, who is in fact somebody who's well versed in the area of media and communication, who's worked with people from across the globe, whom I myself have media relationship. And today what I want to be able to do is to have that conversation with Anjum. Assalamu alaikum, Anjum, how are you?
Walaikum assalam, Shanaz. Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah.
Excellent. It's great to see you. Now, I want to start by asking the question about the role of media today, before moving on to whether it is creating or responsible for in terms of fanatics. But what is in your eyes, Anjum, what is the role of media today?
Well, I'm not too sure. The media role, Shanaz, as you know better than I do, is to report factually and not to, not to manipulate the truth. We have seen that, and it's not something that's happened recently. We've been seeing that for a long time, where media manipulates stories, particularly if they happen to be about Islam or Muslims. And this is not something that I've just, I'm telling you lightly. When you look at the statistics, when you look at the studies, when you look at the research that has been done, I think it was only last year that MCB, Muslim Council of Britain, talked about and said that 78% of news in the Daily Mail had negative views about Muslim, negative themes about Muslim and Islam. I'm not saying 20%, I'm talking 78%, that's a high figure.
You started off by saying that the role of media is to report factual information.
Absolutely.
And it could be argued, couldn't it, that depending upon which school of thought or which side of the fence you sat on, if you are, you gave the example of the Daily Mail or the Daily Mirror or any particular newspaper.
Mail on Sunday.
Mail on Sunday. So if you are a reader of the Mail on Sunday and that information, you could be sitting on the side of the fence who says, well, that information is correct. But there's always another story, isn't there?
Absolutely. And the rise in Islamophobia attacks not only on children and women and men, but right across the board. We have seen that. We have seen women have been attacked with the headscarf. And when the media, electronic media is reporting, we often find the subliminal images that are being created. You would see a terrorist attack, or you would see something which is terribly negative, and you would have this little woman in a headscarf walking across the road. What kind of an image
what relevance would that have? For example, if there's the story that's been portrayed about, let's say there was an attack on the street, or let's just say there was something, a murder, or something, say, less of a media story, let's say there was a wedding or something exciting happening, a party happening or something, some sort of celebration, that portrayal of that person would you argue, Anjum, that it's always the fault of the media, or is there a reality behind that as well? You know,
I think
in terms of a negative story that comes out, if that person happens to be Muslim, is that the fault of media? Because the fact is, Anjum, that person may be Muslim, and yes, they are involved in that positive or negative activity.
But demonizing 1.5 billion Muslims doesn't work for me, Shanaz. You know, we have had a terrorist attack where over 70 people were killed in Europe by a man who hated Islam, who hated Muslims. Did we assume that whole of Europe was Islamophobic? So we have to be very careful. The media creates the vibes. And when you have religious illiteracy, particularly when it concerns the Muslim community, then, you know, you create a kind of radicalization within communities. And we've seen that happen.
Where does it sit with, you mentioned a particular media chain in terms of, if I can call it, white British media chain. What about the rest of the media? I mean, for example, we're a media channel, we are British. Nowhere does it say that we are a British Sky channel. We're not a Pakistani Sky channel. We're British, and the same goes for a lot of the other media channels that are here. And some of them, many of them, that I would perhaps say, and please correct me if you think differently, that the indigenous population don't watch, but the Pakistani community watches, or Bengali community watches, or the Gujarati community watches. They're media channels that air their programs from those particular countries, Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, etc., happen to be here. What role do they play then? Because surely they should be held accountable for the images and the information that they're sharing on their channels.
No, you see, anyone who commits an act which is inappropriate and creates, you know, disharmony in a community should be held accountable. But we have seen that the media, the Western media, has not been held accountable. Who's going to hold them accountable? If you look at Baroness Warsi, she's been screaming about it, that within her own party, she was the chairperson of the Conservative Party. She has not been able to hold them responsible. So who is going to hold responsible? Where does that begin? I mean, I would like to see the Conservative Party come out clean and say, yes, we have a problem here. And not only that, if you remember I think it was last year, there was Gary Jones who took over the Guardian newspaper. When he took over, he said that he found that the newspaper and the editorial he changed the editorial direction because he found that it was Islamophobic. So
I mean,
we are
you
looking
talk about
at
the Conservative Party, but there is evidence to suggest that that is not something that's isolated within the Conservative Party. There's also evidence and reports in relation to the Labour Party and other parties themselves, in terms of within their own parties that there are issues of prejudice and racism and Islamophobia, but obviously in terms of anti-Semitism and all those issues. But before we talk about the politics, I want to take you back to, you made a statement about manipulates, that the media manipulates. And one of the things that recently that has come to light is BBC's reporting. Another, you know, what I would see is, you know, when you talk about BBC, you hold them perhaps more accountable than many other institutions, because they are an institution. In fact, our TV license, we pay for the BBC, don't we? So as the public, we feel that we have a stake in that. Why is it then, Anjum, that they are allowed to get away with, some would argue, of the images that they have recently shown in terms of Israel, in terms of Gaza, Palestine, and other countries where they have a particular, perhaps it could be argued, that they have a particular brief and they follow that narrative? You know, as we've seen other outlets such as CNN and other, you know, big, powerful media streams.
You see, what I'm hearing is that who will hold these people accountable?
Yes.
Okay. Do we have that kind of leadership? When we talk about we, inverted commas, I'm talking about Muslim leadership. So the question that I would say, well, the Joe Blogs on the street is not going to be able to do it. So you
Why
have
does it need to be
organizations.
Muslim leadership, Anjum? If these are licensed broadcasters, of course they are, they're regulated, aren't they? So you've got Ofcom, Ofsted, you've got all these regulators and ombudsmen that would investigate any kind of complaint. So why does it take a Muslim leader? I'm asking you the question. Why would it take a Muslim leader to talk, to complain, or to open up the debate about what's being aired on a Muslim issue? Isn't that the responsibility of the people on a wider context?
I wouldn't go there, Shanaz, because that's a really, really bag full of really a lot of, Pandora's box here. The fact is that I am a Muslim. My interest is in justice for all. But when I see my faith being demonized, when I see my Muslim community members being demonized, I'm afraid that's the lead that I take. And I want my leadership to take that lead. And we have some very good people who are doing a lot of good work. You have members of MCB, Miqdad, for instance, does a lot of work. You have organizations like MEND. You have organizations like Five Pillars. But how are they supported by the Muslims? These are Muslim organizations, but how are they supported? We don't have those kind of resources. And I think it's been a long time that we have pointed fingers at the other to say that's the problem with the media, that's the problem with politics, that's the problem with society. But then I think the question keeps coming back, well, what the heck am I doing about it? Shouldn't I be taking the lead? Shouldn't I be supporting those organizations who are doing a fantastic job in holding the government, holding the policies accountable? And we don't see that happening. So your question is...
Basically, let me try and understand what you're saying. What you're actually saying is that when it comes to issues around Islamophobia, for example, if we use that example, that the Muslim leaders, and I use Muslim leaders because that in itself is a discussion and debate in itself. But those people that have got some responsibility, if they belong to an organisation, that they themselves, we should hold them accountable because they
Absolutely.
are our voice. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. Look, Sayyida Warsi, Baroness Sayyida Warsi has stood up and spoken out. And I respect that. But when you had leader of the Labour Party walking out or not attending a function because there was a lobby that said, you can't talk about that, you can't do that. And he didn't attend, or he walked out. I cannot remember. The fact is, I would have liked to have seen every single Muslim, Asian member of Labour Party to say, here's my resignation, we're not dealing with you because you have not honoured.
But Anjum, that begs the question that when they when they're elected, as for example a member of parliament, that they're elected as a member of parliament. They're not elected as a member of the Muslim parliament, are they? And then constituents, whether it be, say, Manchester or Bradford or Leeds, if you look at the overall percentage of people whom elect them, that the Muslim percentage is of a minority. So they also represent everybody else, don't they? Would you?
But I'm not represented.
Okay.
Has my MP represented me? Has the leader of the Labour Party represented me? I'm sorry, he did not represent. He did not represent. And I want to know why. I was not represented when he walked out or when he did not attend. I was not represented. Why should I vote for any party? Because I am not seeing that happen. My own Prime Minister made a comment that women in niqab are letterboxes. And to this day, we've not had a full-fledged direct apology. And you're saying to me, should I not feel offended? I am offended. I'm disgusted. Because my Prime Minister
I want to bring
offended.
I want to bring this back to the issue, the topic in terms of media. So obviously politics or any other sort of institution has an important connection, a relationship with media. Do you believe that when these things are reported, and I can remember back, and you will remember back to when Jack Straw spoke about the niqab,
absolutely,
and, back in Blackburn, and the debate that went on, is that media reporting and putting it into context and then opening the wider debate? Or do you think that they actually do letterbox certain news items because it's interesting news?
Well, it sells, doesn't it? It sells. And today the media needs to sell. Paper media certainly needs to sell. Who's buying the newspapers? They need to sell. But I mean, if my own Prime Minister can make that comment, the media is going to sell it. And how does that then work through those people who are illiterate, media illiterate? That's what they believe.
When you say illiterate, Anjum, what do you refer to as being literate?
Well, I think when I talk about
social media, we have TV, we have radio, we have all sorts. So when you talk about illiterate, can you elaborate on that?
Well, there's a religious illiteracy. All women wearing a headscarf represent something. You know, I will never forget when I was teaching, I used to do something. I would have this lady in a headscarf with a gun. And she was, and I would ask the student, I say, okay, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? 99.9%. And over 10 years, only one person came out with the correct answer. And I have visited over, I think it was 700 schools. And that poor child, that poor girl with the gun was target shooting. But all they could think about was, she's a terrorist. Now these are school kids. And we have conditioned people to think about the Muslim women or Muslim faith in a particular manner. And that's what I'm saying is not only dangerous, but it goes against the grain of community cohesion. You cannot have a cohesive community. You cannot have a society where people can live it peacefully. There was a time, Shanaz, when you and I could walk down the street, and I'm going back pre-9/11. And then we went through all that. And we saw the rise of Islamophobic attacks. We saw how media represented. We saw the subliminal images that were being created. And I think what we have seen is how politics and politicians have actually, contributed to that. I would like to see more research being done, I suppose, but we cannot move forward until we accept that there is a problem with our media, that we have a problem with our politicians who use Islamophobia as a tool to further agendas.
Moving away from Islamophobia for a second, Anjum, I want to focus upon the role of media and recent events, and in looking at the protests, in looking at people coming out and protesting against, for example, COVID vaccinations, and protesting against the whole systematically how the government has dealt with that. And today we've had another announcement in terms of what's going to happen in terms of the stage 4 of easing of the lockdowns. So even lockdowns, if you remember historically, people came out when it came to the poll tax. We've had people talking about sort of the idea of having a national identity and speaking out against having, an ID card, etc. So this kind of issue of protesting, coming out and raising your voice, I've been to many protests just as you have, and we've seen them across media. One of the things that I've seen is that there has been a rise of the ability to people to be able to air their views through a certain religious narrative. And I'll give you the example of shouting out, and this was mentioned in last week's program, for example, shouting out Nare Takbeer, Allahu Akbar, that people feel freely, in particular in the United Kingdom, to be able to say that. And the media is picking up on that and showing that in certain instances, and in other instances, removing that from the tape. How do you see the balance there on that?
The reason that why we're living here is simply because of that, isn't it? That we have those rights. But because we have those rights, we can challenge many of the things that we disagree with. And I think that's what democracy is about, isn't it? When people talk about that this is democracy. So maybe that's what democracy is. But democracy gives me that right to speak up and to challenge the authority. We have seen demonstration against Gaza recently. We have seen, we go back to poll tax, if you remember, the Margaret Thatcher, God help us.
Yes.
So we've seen, and we have those processes that we can take advantage of. I think my concern is when those processes don't go anywhere. I can go on a march, but where is that leading me to? What changes will that bring? Do those processes bring changes? And for instance, we had the poll tax, and it did bring changes. We had 1 million march for illegal Iraq war. It did not bring changes. What was the difference? Why didn't it bring any changes?
Yeah, and recently, obviously, over the decades, we've seen Kashmir, we've seen the issue, obviously, with Bosnia, Chechnya, and most recently with Black Lives Matter again, which has been revived, and now again with Palestine and Gaza. But Andrew, the role of media, would you say that they totally manipulate the facts that have been shown there, or do you believe that they are showing the true facts there? Do you believe that stations like ours and other stations out there and media outlets out there are actually showing the real face of what's happening out there?
I think that, of course there is. Of course we see facts happen. Of course we see that. But I think what I'm trying to say is that when it concerns the Muslim community, then I see that the media manipulates a certain kind of emotion.
And what emotion would that be? Are you particularly looking at sort of aggression? Are you looking at aggression or anger? Are you looking at the opposite side would be peace, wouldn't it? Because most recently there was a funeral procession, very peaceful. But the image that I saw, Anjum, on a newspaper, a regional, in fact, it probably bigger than regional, wasn't the peaceful procession. The image that I saw was possibly a 10-second attempt for somebody climbing the fence. They didn't show the procession. They didn't show the peaceful people standing there.
That's manipulation.
They didn't show the children crying and the women and the men standing in silence, did they?
No, but that's manipulation, isn't it? Isn't that? That's what's saying is, look at these people. That's what's happening. That's what they do. But we see that all the time. I mean, it's nothing new, seriously. But then
is that acceptable? Is that a norm? Should we just wash it, brush it under the carpet and say, well, that is what happens and that's what makes news, it makes it interesting? Or do you believe that we should be holding those people accountable? Because in fact, what I recall, Andrew, and I may be wrong, and please viewers let us know later on.
No, but we need to hold
or leave your comments. I think it wasn't actually a white middle class male who took that picture. It was actually somebody from the audience and actually forwarded it on, and it was I think, please do correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was a Muslim person that put that picture up.
Yeah, as I said, I did not see it. I cannot comment on that. But that doesn't mean to say that the brown Muslims or white Muslim cannot commit, those kind of silly deeds. I'm not saying that. Here we're talking about a mass media, where it's reported last year that the Sunday Mail, 78% of the people, 78% of the themes were negative about Muslims. 78%. I want to hold that accountable.
But it could be argued, Anjum, that the type of people, very cliche, stereotypical, that are actually reading those kinds of newspapers are the ones that they perhaps, when you talk about literacy level or anything else, they perhaps are quite low in the bottom of the pile. and they're perhaps not the people who are the policymakers, perhaps not involved in within the power struggle to make that change. So does it really make a difference?
But hold on a minute, hold on. The Prime Minister is not in that same category. The leader of the Labour Party is not in the same category, but they have done exactly that. Exactly that. So I'm sorry, but no, that's not going to wash. I want my Prime Minister to come out and say, what I said was utterly wrong. But he didn't. So that makes me wonder, who's going to hold them accountable? So for me, the only people that can hold them accountable are the people who are in the Labour Party or in the Conservative. I want to see the Muslim, because I'm talking as a Muslim. I want the Muslim MPs, both parties, to say, okay, enough, we're not doing this anymore.
Okay, so how far do you take that? So one would be to have a discussion, or for members, like you said, to actually hold their leaders, their politicians accountable, general public, and then you've got those people that are perhaps members of a party, maybe elected in that party. So there's an actual process, isn't there? But by airing those kinds of sentiments and saying, I want something to be done about it, and to be, if I was use better words, perhaps to say, making a song or dance about it on the media, are you not creating a group of people, or are you not igniting that kind of aggression, if I may use that word, against that particular party or that particular person, whether it be the Prime Minister or whether it be elected or unelected representatives?
Okay, let me give you an example. If the had said something about my Jewish brothers and sisters in the same tone that he talked about women in that Muslim women look like letterboxes, what do you think would have happened? There would have been an uproar. Actually, he would have never been able to say that. He would have never said it. So I'm asking, why am I less? Why is the community that I come from is less? That wouldn't have happened. If the newspaper had printed that, it would have been closed down, or there would have been an apology from the editor.
But so yes, it was in big letters on the tabloid newspapers, in fact the national newspapers, and those words were used. But by using those words, whether they be, say, even if they are in context, are we not creating people out there that feel then, as a result, that they can pick up a weapon, whether it be a knife or whether it be a gun or anything else, and go out and then deal with the world in that way, through aggression, by killing people, by murdering people, by are you not doing that? Are you not instigating that, Anjum? I'm asking that question.
I'm not instigating it. I'm a peaceful person. I am not instigating. I'm saying is that kind of...
No, I'm saying if that kind of tabloid is acceptable and that is the narrative that is being pushed out, are we not doing that?
Are you saying that we are propagating that?
Yes, and if I'm asking that question. Should we not be held responsible for creating that feeling, that aggression, that anger amongst people that they then feel as a result that they can do that?
But that's what the media is doing. That's what the media is doing. Look, we've had several cases where people have said that they have been groomed by the far right, by the people reporting like Kate Hopkins, like Tommy Robinson. They had their interest in, victimizing has come up from groups like these. Who is supporting these groups? Who is providing help? Let me give you another example. It's not that long ago, I think it's about 3 years ago, where Kate Hopkins made a comment as final solutions for the Muslim, and she tweeted that. Can you believe that this woman tweeted a final solution? We all know what final solution means. Final solution for the Muslim community. It's horrendous. And she's a journalist. And she has many followers. So
would you go down, would you agree then that the recent censorship, if I may use that word, that has come into light, whether it be Twitter, whether it be Facebook or whatever it is out there, that the censorship laws and holding media, whether it be social media or otherwise, accountable for what's out there, do you welcome that?
It depends on, again, it's a loaded question, isn't it? What is freedom of speech? Because there will be a group of people who scream that we are actually diluting freedom of speech. But I would like this to be held accountable. I don't want to see people who are abusing their resources and their power and their platforms to create this kind of feelings. But you know, we've gone through this route before. When you've had the cartoon affair, we said that people should be held accountable. But then we had what's thrown back at us was that this is freedom of speech. So I get the feeling that freedom of speech is it's only available when it comes for non-Muslims.
Could it be argued, Anjum, from a non-Muslim perspective or a non-faith perspective, that we Muslims make it an issue when it comes to Islam, but yet they remain quiet about any other religion or any other offense, if it's offensive? So for example, let's say the LGBT community, for example. Let's give the example of anti-Semitism and those communities. Let's talk about disabilities. Let's talk about women. Let's talk about an array of things that if it suits them, then it becomes an issue of their right in this country, but yet they don't come out and support any other group of people.
I think as a Muslim, we cannot be anti-Semitic. We can't be. It's impossible. But if you're equating Zionism and Judaism, then we have a problem here. LGBT, as far as I'm concerned, I can only speak from my faith perspective. If I stand up and say, in my faith, we cannot have homosexual relationships because my faith does not allow it, does that make me homophobic? No, it doesn't. Because I also say that in my faith, there's no alcohol allowed. Does that make me some sort of alcoholic freak? Why don't people say that? But they only pick up on LGBT.
I mean, it could be argued, though, Anjum. I mean, it could be argued that the debate in terms of the LGBT cannot be compared to alcohol. I mean, that again, it's like you said, it's a matter of faith.
No, the point
I want to come back to the role of media in this. That when a comment, like, for example, that you just made, that this is what my faith dictates. Yeah, this is not me. This is what my faith dictates. And I may not, whilst I don't want to cause offence, but this is what my faith dictates.
Absolutely.
And that can be seen as okay, but on the other hand, in terms of freedom of expression and freedom of speech, it can be seen that you are homophobic, that you are against a certain group of people.
Not at all, not at all. Absolutely not at all.
Is it because of the language that you choose, Anjum, in order to say that? Is it because you, as Anjum Anwar, are able to articulate that in a way that is non-offensive, whereas other people may not have those language vocabulary?
That brings us back to religious illiteracy, but it also brings back to us that our leadership needs to be very direct. I mean, I have been in room where I've seen scholars sitting in that room and they have not spoken up. And it begs the question, well, why aren't you saying something? My faith says to me that a man and a woman can get married, not the same sex, okay? This is my guidance. I'm not saying that you don't do it. That's between you and what happens in, in the privacy of your bedroom. I'm not interested in that. But I cannot
when people like Tommy Robinson come out, Anjum, and they quote verses from the Quran and Hadith and say, this is what their religion says, and it's against a certain community. The fact that we don't have people out there who are able to articulate and explain it, are you then saying that it's actually them that are held responsible for the fanatics out there? When I say fanatics, I don't just mean Muslim fanatics. I mean fanatics across the board. When I say extreme left or extreme right, I don't refer to a particular faith group. I mean, generally speaking, is it because of the lack of information or people out there, the so-called leaders, you keep referring to our leaders, is it because they are failing to do their jobs?
I think the present tense is wrong. They have failed to do the job, whether they're religious leaders or whether they are political leaders. So, you know, I'll probably never get invited on your show again, but the fact here is that I'm sorry. I want, you know, I believe that this is the only country where I can live as a Muslim. I believe that. I believe that. But it's because I believe that I'm able to be vocal. And I believe that I will be heard. I'm holding my own community leadership responsible for many things, but I'm also holding my generic political leadership. So there's some goodness and there's a lot of work to be done. But that doesn't mean to say that I will compromise with the values of my faith. I
Does
cannot
faith
be
always
assimilated.
matter, Anjum? When we talk about, you talk about the portrayal of, you make reference to images, you make reference to the information out there, you make reference to religious, let's say, literacy, you talk about understanding religion, but it's not as simple as that, is it? So religion itself, it can be quite complex depending upon where you are in that journey. You know, by background, you've spent many years teaching young people, going into schools and wider society. It's not as simple as that, is it? So how do we then understand where people are in that journey? And if we don't understand, Anjum, then how do people who are running media outlets, newspapers, Facebook and YouTube channels, and they've taken an image, how do they understand the consequences of that?
I think it's I wish I had a magic wand. You know, I could just do it. It's unfortunately it doesn't work. And I think we all have to take responsibility. We have to take responsibility for our home and our children and our families. We need to be well versed with what is going on outside. We need to be aware what are our own values. And I think the confusion comes where a certain kind of liberalism takes over. And you know, and then we get confused. Then we back off. And now we're living in a society where if you hold certain values which are very alien to the liberal culture, then you're seen as very extremist. You know, because religion, inverted commas, is not fashionable. It's not something that you do.
Other than religion, Anjum, you make a lot of reference to religion. But other than religion, or let's say overtly religious issues, so general issues, when media is portraying images of young people partying or images of a mixture of communities in terms of Western and Eastern communities, hospitality, entertainment, do you believe that that there is overtly sort of on a conscious level that they are picking and choosing what they want to portray because there is a particular narrative that is being created out there?
Yeah, I think that the media wants to create a certain kind. And I said, I keep coming back to you, Shanaz, that I can only speak from who I am, okay, and what values I have. I can only speak from that. I can't speak from anything else. I think media has a certain narrative, and they want to prove that narrative correct.
Who dictates that narrative, and where does that narrative come from?
Well, if you're going to employ people like Kate Hopkins, that's where the narrative is coming from. unfortunately. If you're going
Well, we
to...
have these advisors, don't we, as well, media advisors,
Yeah.
whether it be with a particular party, but across the board. There are people who are there on payroll to do that. So where does all this narrative come from? Does it come overnight? Does somebody just dream it? Or is it a slower process, a constructive process that they go through?
Well, I can throw the question back at you, that you have the Conservative Party, right? And please don't tell me that the Conservative Party does not have their own processes, but they have not been able to investigate the Islamophobia within their party. And this is what Baroness Warsi has been saying. So who holds them responsible? Where is those processes coming from? Why is there a lot of Islamophobia within the Conservative Party? Where is it coming from? So I think the question has to be, is there an intention? And are we living in a global situation where my faith is the enemy?
How much of a role do other external factors outside the United Kingdom, so let's say Saudi Arabia and the images and the media that comes out of there, other places, other Muslim countries, let's say Pakistan, let's say, for example, Turkey, let's talk about Egypt and Israel and all those other countries. How much of do external dynamics, political dynamics, play a role in what happens in the media here?
International events impact local communities. We've always known that. You know, what happens, and we've just seen that, what happened in Al-Quds in Jerusalem, when Al-Aqsa was raided. You know, throughout the world, you saw demonstrations continuously. I mean, even in our own country, in London, you know, we had very big demonstrations, and in every town. So international events impact communities. And of course, as you know, what happened in Al-Quds was not simply about being Muslims. It wasn't. There are people who came out who said you don't have to be a Muslim to support and to, you know, disassociate ourselves with what's happening. So yes, international events have an impact on local communities. And I think that's very important. And I think people need to recognize that. I'll give you another example. A few years ago, I was in a meeting, and I had just returned from Jerusalem. And I remember making a comment at this particular meeting that, you know, we have to respond to this question about what's happening in Al-Quds. And I will never forget, a religious Muslim leader said, but we don't make comments on international events. And I thought, do I walk out or do I respond? But that kind of leadership we still have in rooms where decisions are taken. Okay,
but on the other hand, Anjum, it could be argued that that the focus needs to be on domestic affairs. What happens in my home, my street, my town, my region, my country, and my country is England, the United Kingdom. And what happens in other countries may be of interest, but in reality, my focus needs to be here, because there can be too much of a focus elsewhere, can't there?
Why
we
not?
Sometimes forget what it means to be focused on our domestic affairs.
Are you telling me that what happens in Kashmir does not have an impact on your life?
I'm not saying
I don't
that.
believe. No. What I'm saying is that whether it's Kashmir, whether it's Rohingya, whether it's Syria, whether it's Gaza, whether it's Iraq, all those places, because those are the problem areas, aren't they? They will have an impact on the local communities. What happens in France will have an impact on the communities who are living in our own country, in UK. That will have an impact. So when you have those relationships, because, you know, globally we become a very small world now. So anything that happens has an impact on our lives. If that was not the case, you would have not seen that kind of demonstration in our own, you know, in our own capital city, in what happened in Gaza and what happened in Al-Quds. So it has
To
an
come back
impact.
to the question originally then, Anjum, doesn't seem the sort of media and the role that media plays. So the globalization, or the fact that we become a global community as opposed to separate, that in itself is quite relevant, isn't it?
Yeah, of course it is. You know, Shanaz, I think I'm getting too old for all this, by the way. It's very difficult to separate yourself from what is happening in the world. It's just impossible, because we've shrunk. You know, there was a time where we used to write letters to get the information over. Now it only takes 1 second to get that information. So I think we've shrunk. So whatever is happening, we are impacted. So what happens in India, we are going to be impacted. What happens in America?
As we've seen with the global pandemic and the Delta
Absolutely.
variant. In the last 2-3 minutes, Anjum, I want to direct question. Do you believe that media is creating fanatics?
I believe that media is helping to create a certain kind of personality that can be pushed over, and that frightens me. What frightens me is that when my son leaves, I'm not happy until he's home, because I've got thoughts in my head. Where did you go? Where are you going? What can happen? Or when I'm going with a headscarf. So I'm saying that the media in my country may be pushing certain people with certain mindset to do things which are undesirable, inappropriate, and not acceptable,
So
and are not British values.
What's the solution? If you can see that, and other people are seeing that, and we're seeing a certain narrative or certain images, and or a pick and choose approach as to what we show, then what is the solution, Anjum? Final word.
Solution is, I think the solution is, number one, that, again, I'm speaking as a Muslim, that the Muslim community needs to support those outlets that are doing a fantastic job. Your organization has been around for a long time. How do we support those organizations? That's number one. Number two, I would like to see members of the major main political parties say to them, that's not on. We're not dealing with you. We're finished. Okay? No room, no more discussions. We will not accept this. And we have to do it. You know, there has to come a point where we say it's not good enough to have discussions anymore. I want an action.
Okay, thank you, Anjum. We're going to stop there. We've actually talked about a lot of things, and we've come up with some solutions as well. Inshallah, I hope you will join me again on this program, Unscripted. So here we are, looking at the role of media, politics, religion, and those people that we hold accountable. And I want to ask you to ponder on this question. What role do you or I have to play when it comes to media and the creation of a certain narrative, and in fact, fanatics, whatever they may be? So think about that, and I'll see you very soon on Unscripted with me, your host, Shanaz Saddique. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.